When we usually look at government funding for massive sectors like agriculture, it feels a bit like turning on a giant floodlight in the dark.
Right,
So you
exactly.
flip the switch, you burn a tremendous amount of energy, and light just scatters everywhere.
Mm,
And sure, the whole landscape gets a little bit brighter, but
yeah.
I mean, a massive amount of that energy is just wasted, illuminating empty space.
Or worse, it actually creates blind spots.
Yeah.
We uh we like the comfort of the floodlight approach because it feels like we're taking massive action across the board. It looks great on a spreadsheet.
Right, big numbers.
Exactly. But a broad, untargeted beam rarely penetrates the structural shadows where the real problems hide. In a landscape with severe resource constraints, that broad approach is just highly inefficient.
Which brings us to the war room. Welcome. Today's deep dive is pulling insights directly from the Union Cabinet's July 2025 press release, NEI Aayog's aspirational district frameworks, and, well, a pretty tall stack of expert agricultural policy analyses.
It's a lot of material to get through.
It is. And our mission today is to swap that floodlight for a laser. We are running a high-level strategic session on a structural reform that completely rewires how India handles agricultural development.
We are unpacking the Prime Minister Danya Krishi Yojana, or PMDDKY.
Yes, PMDDKY. And whether you are prepping for a high-stakes policy exam, looking to sound like the smartest person in the room on rural economics, or, structuring a top-tier analytical argument, this is your blueprint.
It really is a fundamental shift in governance. Approved by the Union Cabinet on July 16th, 2025, and rolling out for a 6-year run starting in the 2025-26 financial year, you have to understand that this isn't just another agricultural subsidy program.
It's much more targeted than that.
Completely. The government is executing a highly targeted strike on a historical vulnerability in Indian agriculture. I'm talking about regional farm output disparity.
Okay, let's diagnose the disease before we look at the cure. Historically, Indian agriculture has been a story of extreme contrast, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We have regions that are absolute powerhouses, and then we have massive swaths of the country that seem, I don't know, stuck in a time loop. Why is that disparity so entrenched?
Well, if we rewind and look at the historical baseline, the traditional agricultural policy, especially dating back to the Green Revolution, was incredibly successful at boosting national yields.
Right, it saved the country from famine.
Exactly. But it created an intense regional bias. States like Punjab and Haryana became the unquestioned breadbaskets. They had the right initial conditions, and the floodlight of government funding, amplified their success.
But that meant other areas got left behind.
Yeah, vast regions, particularly in the east and the rain-fed drylands, just completely stagnated. The government's rationale with PMDDKY is the hard acknowledgement that, well, a rising tide does not automatically lift all boats.
Especially if some of those boats have massive holes in their hulls.
Precisely.
So the old way was throwing money at the whole country, hoping the lagging regions somehow catch up through osmosis. The new way is an outcome-based monitoring framework.
Modeled directly after the Aspirational Districts program, yes.
Right. The sources explicitly note that. Now, for anyone who doesn't have the details of a 2018 policy memorized, give us a quick 10-second refresher on what that actually means.
Sure. Think of the Aspirational Districts program as the moment the government stopped just, handing out checks and started keeping a public scoreboard.
Scoreboard, I like that.
Back in 2018, they identified the absolute poorest, most underdeveloped districts in the country and ranked them based on real-time data across health, education, and infrastructure.
And that creates competition.
Massive, almost cutthroat competitive development among district magistrates. It proved that if you relentlessly track data at the micro level, you can force rapid institutional change.
Wow. And PMDDKY is taking that exact data-driven DNA and injecting it directly into farming.
That's exactly it.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, transparency changes behavior. So let's look at the actual targets. We need to look at the hard data, but I don't just want a list of numbers. I want to know how these metrics interact on the ground, Right, the memory layer.
Yeah. The first big anchor number in our sources is 100. The policy targets exactly 100 districts across the country. How were they chosen?
Well, they certainly weren't chosen by throwing darts at a map. The criteria are explicitly defined, non-negotiable, and they tell a story about structural failure.
What are the criteria?
To make this list, a district must exhibit 3 overlapping traits: low productivity, moderate crop intensity, and poor credit ratings.
I want to pause on that last one because poor credit rating sounds like financial jargon. But on the ground, it's a devastating bottleneck.
It really is.
Let's visualize a farmer in one of these lagging districts. They want to buy a better drought-resistant seed or maybe set up micro-irrigation.
Right, basic upgrades.
Yeah, but they walk into a formal bank, and because the whole district is essentially redlined with poor credit flow, the bank denies the loan.
Which forces that farmer right into the hands of informal local moneylenders. And those guys are charging, what, 30 or 40% interest?
That's predatory.
At that point, the math is broken. Even a good harvest won't yield enough to pay off the interest, let alone the principal.
Right.
The farmer can't access technology, they can't take risks, and they are permanently trapped in a low-yield loop.
And that trap is exactly why 1.7 crore farmers, that's our second anchor number, are the direct targets here.
Exactly. 17 million farmers.
These are the people living inside these 100 specific districts who desperately need an intervention that the open market simply isn't going to provide.
The scale is crucial to understand here. We are talking about 17 million individual economic actors whose localized struggles literally drag down the entire national agricultural output.
All right, so we know who we are targeting and why. Now let's get into the mechanics of the government's response, because I'll be honest, this is where my alarm bells started ringing when reading the policy briefs.
You mean the convergence aspect?
Yes. The sources highlight the integration of 36 existing central schemes across 11 different ministries. When I hear 11 different ministries, I immediately picture 11 chefs trying to bake a single cake without burning the entire kitchen down.
It sounds like an administrative nightmare.
Historically, getting ministerial silos to coordinate is impossible. How is this actually meant to function on the ground without causing total bureaucratic chaos?
It's a fair question, and it's the most critical vulnerability of any massive policy. This drives us right into the governance reform at the heart of PMDDKY. The entire framework hinges on one specific administrative concept.
Which is?
Convergence.
Convergence. Okay, let's translate that out of government speak.
Think of the traditional system like 36 different extension cords all tangled up, plugging into random low-power outlets across a village.
Okay, visual.
The Ministry of Water Resources is over here building a concrete irrigation canal. Meanwhile, a mile away, the Ministry of Agriculture is actively promoting a low-water crop that doesn't even need the canal.
That's so counterproductive.
Exactly. And down the road, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy is subsidizing solar water pumps for fields that have no groundwater left.
Wow. So that is fund fragmentation in a nutshell. One hand has absolutely no idea what the other is doing.
Yep. The funds get diluted, the efforts cancel each other out, and the farmer is left with half-finished solutions.
So how does convergence fix that?
Convergence forces all 11 of those ministries to untangle their cords and plug them into one single high-voltage generator. They have to pool their targeted resources for these 100 districts into a single cohesive channel.
So it's not about creating a new department to manage it.
No, the goal isn't to create a giant, bloated new bureaucracy. It is definitively to prevent the duplication of efforts. But the real genius of the scheme isn't the coordination at the top in New Delhi.
Where is it then?
It's how deeply decentralized the institutions are at the bottom.
Because dictating a hyper-specific farm policy for 100 vastly different districts from an air-conditioned desk in the capital is a guaranteed recipe for failure.
Exactly. What works for a dryland farmer in Rajasthan is useless to a farmer dealing with floodplains in Assam.
Right.
Which is why the execution of that convergence is pushed entirely down to the local level. It relies on what the policy calls district agriculture and allied activities plans.
And these plans aren't drafted by distant bureaucrats, right?
No, they are developed by local Samitis or action committees right there in the district.
This is a fascinating mechanism. When you look at the composition of these Samitis in the source material, they place a massive emphasis on the active participation of progressive farmers.
It's a game changer.
It's not just the district magistrate and a few local politicians sitting in a room looking at spreadsheets. They are pulling in the actual boots-on-the-ground innovators.
This is a masterclass in capacity building. By integrating progressive farmers directly into the planning samiti, you bridge the gap between theoretical policy and practical reality.
Give me an example of how that plays out.
Well, a bureaucrat might look at data and say, we need more tractors. The progressive farmer in the room will say, tractors are useless here because our land holdings are too fragmented. What we actually need is shared drone spraying for pest control.
That localized knowledge is invaluable. And these Samitis have strict mandates, right? They aren't just brainstorming.
No, very strict mandates. They are tasked with fixing localized gaps in 3 specific areas: agricultural infrastructure, technology access, and supply chain logistics.
Let's track how this works with a tangible scenario. Let's take a hypothetical village in one of these lagging districts that grows tomatoes.
Okay.
Under the old system, a bumper crop is actually a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
The tomatoes ripen all at once, there's no local cold storage, the roads are terrible, and the supply gluts the local market.
The prices crash.
Exactly. The tomatoes rot before they ever reach the national highway, and the farmer takes a massive loss.
But under PMDDKY, the local Samiti sees the rotting tomatoes. They don't have to wait for a massive, multi-year national infrastructure scheme to eventually reach them.
They have the authority to act right then.
Exactly. They can pull funds from the converged 36 schemes right now. They grab money from the Ministry of Food Processing Industries to build a micro-cold storage unit.
Nice.
And they grab funds from the Ministry of Rural Development to pave a reliable feeder road to the highway.
And suddenly you've transformed the local economy. The tomatoes don't rot.
In fact, maybe they use some of that tech access funding to set up a small processing unit. Now, instead of selling raw, highly perishable tomatoes for pennies, the village is selling shelf-stable tomato puree at a premium.
They diagnosed the local disease, applied the specific converged remedy, and captured the economic value right there in the district.
Exactly. Value addition.
Okay, let's pull the camera way back. We've zoomed in on the local samiti, the extension cords, and the tomato puree. But what does this mean for the macro picture?
Right, the strategic angle.
How do we interlink a localized supply chain fix to India's broader global and economic standing?
We connect it directly to national inclusive growth. Remember, these 100 districts were chosen because their low productivity acts as a drag coefficient on the national economy.
They pull the average down.
Right. By deploying technology, fixing infrastructure, and adding value locally, like turning tomatoes into puree, you are dramatically boosting per hectare productivity.
So these 100 lagging districts essentially transform from dead weights into massive growth engines.
Exactly. They actively pull up the national agricultural growth rate, but the sources take it even further.
How so?
The scheme is explicitly framed as a vital pillar for Atmanirbhar Bharat, the push for national self-reliance.
That's interesting. Usually when people hear Atmanirbhar Bharat, their minds go straight to semiconductor manufacturing, defense hardware, or, space tech. They don't usually think of agriculture.
And that is a dangerous oversight. Food security is the absolute baseline requirement for national defense and strategic autonomy.
That makes sense.
Look at global geopolitics right now. If a nation relies on imported edible oils, imported fertilizers, or external food supplies, it is highly vulnerable to global supply chain shocks, whether that's a pandemic, a war, or a trade embargo.
So food security is quite literally national defense.
Completely. If you cannot feed your population during a crisis without relying on foreign powers, your strategic autonomy is compromised.
Wow, framing it like that really raises the stakes.
By lifting these 100 vulnerable districts out of stagnation, you are reinforcing the domestic supply chain. You distribute your agricultural risk so a climate shock in one state doesn't crash the whole system. You insulate the nation from external shocks.
I love that framing.
Yeah.
But I have to play devil's advocate again.
Go for it.
We are talking about highly decentralized planning, forcing 11 traditionally siloed ministries to share their budgets, and handling immense capital over a 6-year period.
With a lot of moving parts.
We've both seen massive, ambitious policies that sound beautiful in a war room, but completely disintegrate upon contact with reality. How does the government actually guarantee this doesn't just result in lost funds, local corruption, and empty promises?
That is where the critical evaluation layer comes in. The government isn't just handing over a converged budget and saying, "See you in 6 years, let us know how the tomatoes are doing."
I would hope not.
The oversight framework is arguably the most rigorous, unforgiving part of this entire reform.
This brings us to the 117 KPIs.
Yes, robust oversight is baked into the daily operation of the scheme by tracking district performance against exactly 117 key performance indicators.
And these aren't vague, subjective goals like farmer happiness, right?
No. These are hard, measurable metrics on a dashboard. What is the exact percentage of farmers accessing formal credit this quarter?
Has crop intensity risen?
Exactly. What is the daily throughput of that new local processing unit?
But who is the watchdog staring at this dashboard? Because if the local samiti is grading its own homework, the KPIs are meaningless.
The leash is held by any IOG.
Oh.
And an IOG is the designated central authority responsible for rigorous periodic performance reviews. They are the objective referee.
So NANI-IOG is looking at real-time data for 117 KPIs across 100 districts. What happens when a district inevitably starts failing?
Good question.
I mean, what if a Samiti builds that cold storage unit, but the KPI dashboard shows nobody's using it?
This is the ultimate failsafe. The success of PMDDKY relies entirely on NAIOG's mandate to force immediate course corrections.
Okay, so they intervene.
In the traditional system, a failed project would just bleed money for years until the budget ran out. Under this framework, if a Samiti is missing targets, NIIOG steps in, evaluates the bottleneck, and forces a strategic pivot.
So it is continuous data-driven optimization.
Exactly, to ensure the absolutely optimal utilization of budgetary expenditures.
Okay, let's synthesize this. If you are stepping into a high-stakes policy exam, or you need to pitch this entire structural reform to a skeptic in a 2-minute elevator ride, what is the mental model you need to construct? Give me the 3 non-negotiable pillars of this analysis.
Let's build the blueprint. Your opening hook is the premise. Define PMDDKY not as a generic subsidy, but as a structural, outcome-based reform directly modeled on the Aspirational Districts program.
Got it. And then we have pillar 1.
Pillar 1 is governance. This is where you deploy the keyword convergence. You explain the untangling of the cords.
Right. Highlight that 36 schemes across 11 ministries are pooled to definitively end fund fragmentation.
Exactly. Pillar 2 brings it to the ground. That's the institutional layer. This is your decentralized planning.
You mentioned the local Semitis.
Yes, you emphasize the inclusion of progressive farmers, and you state their mission, fixing localized supply chain logistics and technology access.
Which leads to pillar 3, keeping them honest.
Pillar 3 is accountability. You detail the oversight mechanism. You highlight the 117 KPIs and NATI-IOG's mandate for relentless periodic reviews and immediate course corrections.
And how do we bring it home to show we understand the macro impact?
You link the local to the global. Conclude by showing how localized productivity gains that tomato puree scale up to achieve Atmanirbhar Bharat.
You prove that robust domestic food security is the foundation of national strategic autonomy.
Exactly. If you want to master agricultural policy, those are the concepts you need to drop.
All right, we are at the finish line. Let's initiate a rapid-fire final revision to permanently lock this knowledge into your memory. Give me the 5 must-remember facts.
1. 100 targeted districts chosen specifically for low productivity and poor credit.
2.
2. 1.7 crore farmers directly impacted. 3. 36 schemes across 11 ministries converge into a single channel.
4.
4. A 6-year duration starting FY 2025-26. And 5. NET-IOG tracking progress against a dashboard of 117 KPIs.
Perfect. And what does a probable high-level strategic question look like for this topic?
Expect to encounter something like, evaluate how the principle of convergence in the PMDDKY addresses structural bottlenecks and regional disparities in Indian agriculture.
And the 5 analytical keywords you must anchor your argument with.
Outcome-based monitoring, convergence, decentralized implementation, value addition, optimal resource allocation.
Master those. And you've mastered the architecture of modern Indian governance reform.
Absolutely.
Which brings us back to where we started.
Yeah.
We're finally turning off the wasteful, scattered floodlight and firing up the laser. But I want to leave you with a final strategic question to mull over on your own.
Oh, what is it?
If this highly localized, data-driven, aspirational blueprint actually succeeds in untangling something as massively complex and historically stubborn as the Indian agricultural sector, what other highly fragmented sectors of national governance could be fundamentally transformed using this exact same laser-focused model?
It's a great question.
I mean, could we apply this strict convergence to public health? Could we use local Semitis and 117 KPIs to overhaul primary education? The blueprint is proven, it's just a matter of where we point the laser next.